What's up guys? How's it going? This is Jayavardhan and that's my brother Rajvardhan. And आज हमने सोचा एक था कि हम लोग discuss करेंगे about a niche topic which we did not read up upon much, but from what we have read over the years and उसके हिसाब से we'll try to paint a picture for you guys. Today's topic would be is conventional warfare dead or alive? Given the fact that last 4 or 5 years we've seen a lot of conflicts come and go, and if you take it further in the past, you had a lot of conflicts that took a very nasty and a bloody turn, given the Syrian civil war and all the other conflicts that happened. So keeping that in mind, our focus today would be what is the new definition of a conventional
conventional war.
warfare. And again, we're not going to quote any author. हम लोग आप लोगों को बस अपना पर्सपेक्टिव देंगे. हम लोग बताएंगे कि हमें क्या लगता है कि कन्वेंशनल वॉरफेयर क्या होता है और कन्वेंशनल वॉरफेयर के क्या फंडामेंटल्स हैं और कन्वेंशनल वॉरफेयर कितना चेंज किया है सिंस द सेकंड वर्ल्ड वॉर. बिकॉज आई फील सेकंड वर्ल्ड वॉर वाज लाइक द पिनिकल ऑफ ह्यूमन mass scale destruction and warfare, and that is considered to be like the benchmark as to what could look like two quote unquote armies going at each other without with I feel the same amounts of resources and similar type of technology, and not indulging in quote unquote guerrilla warfare, which again takes the definition to a different tangent. Not saying कि वर्ल्ड वॉर टू से पहले गुरिल्ला वॉरफेयर नहीं होती थी या वर्ल्ड वॉर टू में गुरिल्ला वॉरफेयर नहीं हुई, उसमें भी हुई, और वर्ल्ड वॉर टू से पहले भी बहुत गुरिल्ला वॉरफेयर होती थी. मगर हमारा स्कोप ऑफ द डिस्कशन इज कि व्हाट इज कन्वेंशनल वॉरफेयर इन द 2020s. 2020s में कौन सी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हुई थी राज, तेरे को कुछ आइडिया है?
कट 1 सेकंड के लिए. 15 मिनट के बाद हम मर जाएंगे. पंखा चला देते प्लीज.
अच्छा, कट क्यों करना है?
वो भाई तू कब से रह रहा है इस घर में?
एसी चला दूं?
हाँ ठीक है.
नहीं एसी चला दूं. एनीवे, हाँ राज,
यहाँ पे कंटिन्यू करेंगे, बैठ जाएगा.
ओके. सो 2020 में कौन सी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हुई थी?
आई थिंक एक तरह से वी कैन कंक्लूड दैट द नेचर ऑफ अ कोट अनकोट कन्वेंशनल वॉर इज चेंजिंग. We didn't really read up for this episode, but I did read certain fundamentals of how do you define a conventional war. And naturally, there are some broadly defined definitions, but there is no set catalog that you have to sort of fit into to be classified as a conventional war. For many people, maybe what is going on in Manipur between the Kukis and the Meiteis could also be considered a conventional war, although this is a controversial take. But I think that there are certain checkboxes in definitions, and if you meet those, what you have can be considered a conventional war. Uh, my assessment is that lately, in the 2020s, post February 2022, where we had the Russian advancement into Ukraine, followed by the fall of 2023, sorry, when we had the Hamas attack on southern Israel, followed by the situation in Israel and Gaza, and now what's happening with Israel and Hezbollah. One thing that makes our topic for today interesting is that there are too many actors in the world which definitely resemble conventional armies. They have uniforms, they have a ranking system, and they are going head to head again. So I think early 2010s, post the end of Cold War, maybe the general opinion was that maybe now superpowers in the world are fighting through militant organizations or proxies, which still happens. But now I think more and more areas of the world are seeing direct confrontation, face to face, head to head, with what you can classify as armed organizations or armed forces, with use of convention weapons, with lot of urban combat, with lot of small and medium arms fire. So I would just want to go back to the example of for example, what's going on in southern Lebanon and northern Israel right now, with the Israeli army advancing into South Lebanon, where the Israeli army is naturally a quote unquote professional force, which is directly heading up against Hezbollah, which has its own ranking systems. They are doing modern urban combat, so it's almost like a a conventional army going to war.
Mhm.
That's my assessment of this
Yeah.
whole thing. And because I'm trying to point out a wider trend hinting at this era, I would like to bring in the situation in Sudan, where you have the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. I think one is a indigenous African sort of like legitimate Sudanese army
Mhm.
versus an Arab-backed paramilitary force, but they're both very well organized, very well systematized, armed slash paramilitary forces going head to head in almost like a civil war kind of situation, which is going through dense urban combat with critical port cities being the question of the conflict or being the center of the conflict. So it's almost like the head to head urban warfare with charging at each other's with
Mhm.
assault rifles without too many proxies involved
Mhm.
is coming back. I mean, for sure, you can argue that Hamas and Hezbollah are Iranian proxies, but just a few weeks back, we had a direct strike from Tehran onto Israeli soil. So there's a more concerning trend where even states are going head to head against each other. And if my last hot take before I end this monologue will be that if the world was less Eurocentric, we would be at a stage where we would have started classifying this as a wider regional conflict, if not a world war.
Mhm. Fair enough. Fair enough. So to come back to Hezbollah, I think Hezbollah is a very good example of how a ragtag militia group, which wasn't organized, was eventually organized in mid 80s and took a form of a professional army of sorts. That it became so strong and influential that it was able to take over the entire Lebanese government. In fact, after the Taif agreement, as we discussed in our previous episode, which focused on Lebanon, all the militia groups in Lebanon had to disarm except for Hezbollah. So Hezbollah always had that much of power. Now let's talk about a force or a force that used to exist in the Indian subcontinent, very close to home, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Liberation Tiger of Tamil Eelam, it is said that in its earlier stages, a lot of Tamil separatist groups, which included groups like PLOT and TELO, these groups went to Lebanon to understand how modern guerrilla warfare is fought. And it's through organizations like Hezbollah, which were at their very nascent stages, that they actually learned the art of suicide bombing and basically learned the art of organizing a ragtag militia into a full-fledged state. So Hezbollah not only became a full-fledged state in the Middle East, but it also helped inspire a militant group for good 26 to 28 years to run a parallel state. So just like how Hezbollah is running a state within a state, that's how LTT was also running a state within a state. So that was a very good example, Raj, because what you were trying to get us to was that you had this organization which historically indulged in quote unquote unconventional warfare become so organized and so distinct that their sense of unconventional warfare became conventional warfare, because eventually LTT also started going towards having its ragtag air force and very small navy. They were able to establish a very good network around the Indian Ocean to procure arms through international organizations and through coincidentally through the water channels which were historically used by the Cholas. In fact, the logo on LTT's flag, the tiger, is inspired by the Chola symbol as well. So it's a very interesting anecdote.
That's a very interesting take.
Yeah.
I think now that we are speaking of
Mm,
examples closer to home,
mm,
let's look a little bit to our northwest and
mm,
to see that in 2021 August there was the Taliban takeover of Kabul,
mhm,
a somewhat semi-legitimate state almost has now been established in Afghanistan with the Taliban control,
Mhm.
and now you have Taliban soldiers, which in the early 2000s, typically experts would analyze as, tribal, feudal Afghan men with Kalashnikovs, are suddenly wearing modern American gear,
Mhm.
flaunting their American made M4A1 rifles.
Mhm.
They're, sort of moving around with very sophisticated American gear. And it's almost like a semi legitimate army with their own ranking system now in place. Yet, uh, our dear Western neighbor Pakistan, which had a very sort of cozy relationship with the Taliban prior to its takeover, which was directly involved in giving a lot of implicit support to Taliban, suddenly got very anxious of the Taliban when the Talib sort of started opening up into the northwestern
ये
frontier
तो ऐसे ही होता
provinces.
है भाई, ये लोग बोल
So
रहे थे
now you
इस्लाम की
have,
जीत हुई है, इस्लाम की जीत हुई है
हाँ
इसमें,
चल
पता नहीं क्या क्या
वो
बोल रहे
बात
थे।
तो ठीक है फिर भी,
हाँ हाँ हाँ,
but then you have now
बटन बांधना है।
the like
हम्म,
now you have like units of the Pakistani army
हम्म,
directly confronting like
हम्म,
Taliban
हम्म,
soldiers and their quote unquote
हम्म,
Durand line, which
हम्म,
the Taliban refuses to recognize
हम्म,
now.
हम्म,
So there's almost like another, if not conventional war, a
हम्म,
light scale conflict going on even there.
yeah,
Now, another example sort of
yeah,
close to home, because I mean, our neighborhood is as fraught as it can be right now.
हम्म,
So, another example close to home is the issue going on in Myanmar,
हम्म,
where India had a lot of infrastructure projects that were supposed to go through maybe like Imphal or sorry, Manipur or like Mizoram into Myanmar. Like there was a highway project that was supposed to go from India into Myanmar into Thailand, and right now the Ministry of External Affairs and the government of India are sort of confused that if these projects are to be taken forward, who exactly are you going to be talking to? Because parts of Myanmar are under the control of a lot of rebel groups which have sort of their own ranking systems. They control significant amount of territory. They have very sophisticated weapons, and they are putting up a very legitimate fight against the regime backed by the
Junta,
military
yeah,
junta. So there's another sort of conventional war going on there. There are legitimate, I would not even use the word non-state actors anymore. I would definitely call them partial state
yeah,
actors
yeah, absolutely.
because they have control, they have ranking systems.
They are in a
Sometimes they
state,
have,
state within a state.
yeah, they have political legitimacy
Mhm,
many times. So there is a definite kind of opening up of many more frontiers
mhm,
and a movement back to like a new kind of conventional war.
mhm.
I'm not saying a new kind of warfare, a new kind of conventional war
So
is what I'm
now, before
implying.
we go further, just for the viewers, what we can do is that we can list out at least four criterion as to what criterion is, right?
Yeah.
So four criterion as to what a conventional warfare, conventional war is. Number one could be the organization having some functioning like a state,
Yeah.
providing healthcare, education,
Yeah.
controlling important ports.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, the organization having uh, legitimacy of the people to an extent, or a particular ethnic group,
Popular support at
popular support.
least. Like, for
Yeah,
example, the Houthi
the Houthi
rebels,
rebels,
or
the Taliban,
or the simpler examples like the Shia
Hezbollah,
backing of Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, yeah, or the Tamil backing of ITT.
Hmm.
Then number three could be a functioning military,
Yeah.
at least at least multiple infantry divisions,
Yes.
for the lack of a better
A
term.
legitimate ranking
Ranking
system.
system, a legitimate ranking system. And number four, we could end at attempts to expanding the military power by including other other aspects of military, like
No.
a ragtag air force,
Hmm.
or having the capacity of operating drones which can actually go strike states. Like yesterday itself, Hezbollah was able to ram a suicide drone inside an army camp in northern Israel, which killed 4 soldiers. So so these are the four four criterion which we can use for uh which we can say that what were we
A
using?
conventional war
A
can be defined
can
by.
be can be defined by can be used to define a conventional war.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that the only area
Mm-hmm.
where we start lacking on our definition of trying to
Yeah.
fit these organizations and
Mm-hmm.
trying to perhaps place organizations like Hezbollah and all into a conventional war would be that maybe another definition of conventional warfare could be compliance with international humanitarian law,
Mm-hmm.
which these organizations might not necessarily do. So that's an element where our assessment will fall short. I
Yeah.
think that's what I'm thinking, because a conventional army, no matter how organized Hezbollah
Mm-hmm.
gets, no matter how many weapons they start flaunting, no matter how stylish their camouflage has become, they might start looking like a real army.
Mm-hmm.
But no conventional government backed or like a UN recognized state army would do is that they won't engage in things like suicide bombing.
Fair enough.
They would comply with humanitarian law. But as we have seen recently, the quote unquote rules based international law order is also not great with humanitarian law, because if
Absolutely.
we were very good with enforcing humanitarian law, the situation in Gaza would have been better.
Yeah.
And
That's what brings us back to the hypocrisy of the International Court of Justice for Yugoslavia
Mhm.
and the Hague Convention, because they've failed to actually bring to justice a lot of parties which have been pro West and pro American, pro Europe. Because had they been very effective, you would have had Saudi Arabia, states like Saudi Arabia or states like Israel being put to the task. Why does
Yeah,
it only Yugoslavia or the former
for
Soviet
sure.
state go through such type of actions? Why does Iran have to go through sanctions? Why
Mm.
but Australia for its crimes in the Indonesian invasion of East Timor doesn't have to face any type of flack, is my argument. So even though we can say that these organizations don't respect certain conventions, but what are these conventions? These conventions are not being followed by the gatekeepers of these conventions. So does
Yeah.
that make these gatekeepers of these conventions unconventional? Is my argument.
Yeah. Well said. And I mean, just today, I was watching a report at of the France 24
Mhm,
news network, which made a lot of sense to me, because one of the reporters on that said that Israel is obviously very confident, threatening the UN peacekeepers to sort of move out of southern
mhm,
Lebanon, which it has been doing, which
mhm,
I personally think is deplorable. No
mhm.
other country would be allowed to nearly attack UN peacekeepers and get away with it, except for Israel. And the opinion of the France 24 journalist also was that,
In Rwanda, it happened. The
yeah,
UN peacekeepers were attacked in Rwanda by
yeah.
the Hutu rebels.
Yeah, but I mean, they didn't enjoy the kind of support that Israel enjoys from the
Yeah,
US,
yeah,
right?
fair enough.
So the blatant violation of this quote unquote rules based order
Mhm,
just by Israel is, it's almost like standard operating procedure for them now, because they've got the backing of basically the main actor in the permanency of the UN Security Council, which is the United States. So with US support, you can nearly attack UN peacekeepers and get away with it. Most
mhm.
countries condemned it. India, which is now in this leadership, considered somewhat proximate, or if not proximate, then somewhat neutral to Israel, has also strongly condemned the attack on UN peacekeepers.
हमारे
It's not
पीछे तो
exactly an
हमारे
attack.
एक Indian UN worker also died in Gaza because of Israeli strikes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is an area where not only are you blatantly violating humanitarian law and bombing innocent civilians, it's reached a place where UN peacekeepers are being attacked. So if a state, at least legally in compliance with international law, is not held accountable,
Mhm.
then what rules based international order are we trying to sort of enforce?
Absolutely.
Which brings me back to our original highlight of this conversation, which is that conventional warfares are definitely making a comeback, and maybe compliance with international humanitarian law is a requisite to be classified as conventional wars, but nobody really actually
Nobody
has
cares.
complied with
Yeah,
international law, at
exactly.
least in the last 100 years.
Yes, yes.
The Second World War was going on while the Jewish minorities were being gassed by the Nazis.
Or the
I'm
invasion
sure
of
that,
Manchuria was all
yeah,
the. What was the predecessor for the United Nations?
League of
League of
Nations.
Nations.
Yeah.
Right? The League of Nations tried to condemn Japan for its actions in Manchuria, but they couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost like I find early modern history and
Mhm.
medieval warfare a lot more civil,
Mhm.
in the sense that you sign an alarm before going to war, you don't fight at night,
Mhm.
you don't sort of shoot at your enemy if they've got your
Or like
back
what the
facing
Muslim
you.
armies used to do, they used to tell the city before capturing it that the
Yeah,
next 3 days it's going to be carnage. We're
yeah.
going to rape your women. We're going to blow up everything, and after that we'll establish our own, rules and establishment, which is going to be governed by the Sharia. So yeah, that was very nice. Or how in India a lot of people used to, after capturing people, it's like, yeah, now you cannot climb the caste hierarchy at all. Very
I
nice.
think it's
Yeah.
I think medieval warfare is like sounding alarms before going to war is somewhat similar to how I find that Iran, through its open channels, lets Israel know that they're going to be bombing Tel Aviv or something.
Or
So
how the
maybe,
IRA used to let everyone know how they're
yeah,
about to bomb,
yeah.
uh,
Speaking of
mm,
unconventional warfare, I
mm.
find that the fact that Gaddafi used to fund and arm the IRA
Yeah.
hilarious,
Yeah.
because that for me is very unconventional, and that's sort of in like the
Mm-hmm.
late 70s era. I
Early
think
80s,
when was the early 80s?
early 80s.
That's the peak of the IRA insurgency. I find that that was a highlighting factor of maybe the Cold War and the
Mm-hmm.
early period of the 20th century, where the essence of warfare was through non state actors.
Mm-hmm.
Even post 1971, like Pakistan moved away from directly confronting India, except maybe certain standoffs in 85, 86, and
Mm-hmm.
naturally the Kargil standoff.
Mm-hmm.
Many military experts choose to not call it the Kargil War, they
Mm-hmm.
call it the Kargil standoff for good
Mm-hmm.
reason, because the Pakistan army initially wasn't even pretending to be the Pakistani army.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always fighting through proxies, through infiltrators, through like intelligence agencies, through propaganda even.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a highlighting feature for a long time. What I am trying to assert through this video is that maybe that trend is being reversed in the 2020s through Russia, Ukraine, through the issue in Sudan.
I would argue that with the dawn of 2020s, obviously I totally agree with the fact that conventional warfare is returning, because you can see the digging of trenches in Russia and Ukraine,
Yeah,
or in Manipur. Manipur has trenches, by the way,
yeah,
between Maitis and Cookies. Oh my god, and
unbelievable. Like,
absolutely unbelievable, and we just pretend it's not happening. And also on top of that, you have a lot more reliance on the dystopian in electro warfare,
hmm,
for the lack of a better term, that
hmm,
we saw in like sci-fi movies. You have so many drones. You had Azerbaijan absolutely annihilating the Armenians in the Nagorno-Karabakh war, and then you have Iranians giving Russians these suicide drones, which they use so effectively against the Ukrainians, and
yeah,
now Hezbollah is using it against the Israelis. So we're seeing like a connection in the warfare that's happening, and
yeah.
it definitely has the capability of becoming something way bigger than what it seems.
Hmm.
And keeping that in mind, I feel एक चीज जो हमें बहुत बहुत ज्यादा सटीकता से देखनी पड़ेगी, वो ये है।
सटीकता एक शब्द है।
क्या सटीकता है शब्द?
अच्छा, ठीक।
सटीकता सटीक तरीके से देखनी पड़ेगी कि
तू कोई और शब्द भी यूज कर सकता था।
लेकिन उसको रख लेंगे। एनीवे
दिस गाय।
एनीवे तो हमें इसको बहुत ही प्यार से और बहुत ही नाजुक तरीके से देखना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि इसका जो लॉजिक है, उसका लॉजिक सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक डोमिनो इफेक्ट पे डिपेंडेंट है, क्योंकि once once if you've got the Russians getting involved in direct warfare, then you know for a fact that the Americans will also get involved.
Hmm.
Once the Americans are involved, all the other proxies are also involved. And once
Hmm.
all the proxies are involved, you can say that it's WW3.
Hmm. I think you could have used the word गंभीरता से देखना
नहीं, मेरे को
पड़ेगा,
सटीकता यूज करना
but
था।
तूने फिर सटीकता, नाजुकता, प्यार, मतलब भाई
प्रॉब्लम क्या है भाई?
ये लक्स का साबुन का ऐड बना रहे हैं हम लोग. But anyway, I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a very delicate switch that if
नाजुकता।
switched on,
हाँ।
you know, if we just tweak the right balance a little bit more to where it's already headed, we can have maybe another front opening up in South Ossetia, for example. So the Georgians are very dissatisfied with the Russians. Russia is already at war with the Ukraine. It's going to pull up proxy states of maybe Russia and NATO, because the closer and closer, the more other NATO nations, especially in central sort of European countries, get pulled into the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the harder it will be to avoid conventional war.
Absolutely.
Like till 2021 and I used to think that okay, maybe eastern Ukrainian civilians are being armed just because as a one in a million event that if Russia actually invades. I used to always think there's no way that Russia is actually going to go to war with Ukraine, but it happened.
8 years
And
later.
I think that because these things don't have a very conventional straight up definition, the actions of Iran in backing Hezbollah repetitively, backing Hamas repetitively, and then Israel sort of taking out Hezbollah's chief, and then now Iran making direct bombing campaigns on Israeli cities. I would call that Iran and Israel being at war.
Absolutely.
I don't know if there are ways to sugarcoat
नहीं
it.
नहीं, बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हैं।
I also think that there are delicate ways in which the Jammu situation is always being sort of
So
heated up by our Western
I
neighbor.
mean, now in Bangladesh there are open calls of, like, supporting the Pakistanis
Yeah.
and being
So
at
our
war.
neighborhood is also
Yeah, yeah,
fraught.
and
And I see JNK police SOG go head to head with the militant separatist terrorists, whatever you want to call them, I definitely call that an element of conventional warfare too.
yeah, of course, because
So
most of these militants are Pakistani army. No matter how much they try to, deny it, just because they're not wearing the Pakistani uniform,
precisely,
that
or
doesn't mean that they're not from the
or
Pakistani
at
army.
the very least trained well by the Pakistani army. Then what is the difference?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know.
In fact,
So
whenever the Pakistani establishment is a bit angry at the army and the political establishment that the army is trying to create, they let out their secrets to everyone, which everyone is aware of, by the way.
yeah,
Like how the Northern Light Infantry of the Pakistani army,
they were the ones who
they were the
made
ones
the
who came
climb into
from
Kargil.
Kargil. It said that 2,400 soldiers of that particular regiment was annihilated, and they never really claimed them. So, and this was claimed by Nawaz Sharif, because around that time he was losing power, and all the power was with Imran Khan. And suddenly Imran Khan loses power. So he also starts revealing a lot of secrets. Saying that the army generals are like scared of Modi and all of that. So it happens. It happens everywhere.
So I guess why a topic about conventional warfare being back is so relevant today is because if we don't tweak a certain number of things the right way, we have a very delicate balance to look over, and if that is not done, then so much more of the world could go into violence. Our neighborhood is totally fraught right now. You look at Myanmar, you look at the ongoing issues in Jammu, so Pakistan is involved still. You are maybe now looking eye to eye with China on certain issues, but there is a lot of anxiety about Chinese settlements in Arunachal. We are still not over what happened in 2020 June. So our neighborhood is fraught. The West Asian region, or popularly known as the Middle East, is in a very delicate balance where even the Muslim world isn't looking eye to eye. Uh, Iran backed Shiite militants have taken the heroic stride of standing up for the Palestinian cause, where they can now confidently assert that the Gulf has just sat and watched and even supported US proxies. So, there are wider regional tensions
Of
growing
course.
everywhere.
And now Turkey, with the whole divide between the Indo-Iranian Iranis and the Semitic Arabs, is trying to be the main Islamic power again, just like at the time of the Seljuks and the Battle of Manzikert.
Hmm.
So again, whenever there is so much confusion in global geopolitics, there is another party which emerges. In fact, it's funny.
And sorry, I'm interrupting
Hmm.
you. Don't forget your thoughts. Stay with it. You can continue it later. And in between all of this, I think it's the first time where US foreign policy has, if not openly, then at very implicit level, started acknowledging that even US and Israel are not looking fully eye to eye anymore. The
Absolutely.
United States is finding it very difficult to continue the bombing campaigns of
Yeah.
Israel incessantly.
Yeah.
And the longer it goes on, even from like countries which are conventionally very close to the
Hmm.
US, voices of criticism starts coming in.
Hmm.
India, by all means, is a very close partner of the
Hmm.
US. And even internationally, diplomatically, we don't get behind
Hmm.
what the Israelis are doing at the moment. So uh, it's and in on top of all that, I think the United States goes to elections next month.
Hmm.
So there is this is the first time the West Asian conflict is going to be such a significant pole
Hmm.
issue in the domestic politics of
Hmm.
the United States.
Absolutely.
So it's not like the US is super keen
Hmm.
on keeping this war alive. Sorry, you were
Absolutely.
saying
No, no,
something?
no, no. I totally agree. And I wanted to take you to another important timeline in the modern history, which we're forgetting. Specifically, keeping in mind conventional warfare. And I think this was the bloodiest war in the entirety of the ending stages of the Cold War. It was the Iran-Iraq War. It was the Iran-Iraq war, and the reason why I'm calling it a conventional war, because it was the most conventional war ever, because it was a battle of attrition, just
Yeah.
like what's happening in Ukraine and Russia right now.
Hmm.
And after a while, both the armies could not, push each other, and they
Yeah.
were just stuck at their borders. And just at their borders, you had chemical warfare being used.
Yeah.
You had all types of small arms being used. You had
Yeah.
different types of air raids, tank battles, you name it. Everything that you associate with a conventional war was happening. In fact, a lot of people have gone on to call Cold War the Third World War just because nuclear weapons weren't used. That doesn't mean
And
the,
just
the
because
amount
it
of death
wasn't,
and destruction that happened during the
yeah,
Cold War
J-
wasn't there.
yeah, and it wasn't
Mm,
Eurocentric again,
exactly.
because many parts of the world were at war at that
Yeah.
time. In fact, I think those are the times when Saddam Hussein started using chemical weapons against Kurds
So yeah,
on the northeastern areas
that was
of
later.
Iraq.
That was later on.
But yeah, I mean,
90s. Yeah.
how much more
Yeah.
violative of international humanitarian law can you be
Hmm.
to start using terms like quote unquote World War III, which I think are so Eurocentric at this point, right?
Absolutely. And
And I think I would sort of shift our focus back to this element of Iran trying to export its revolutionary ideology.
mhm,
I think so much of the Middle Eastern tension is based on, you spoke about the
mhm,
Iran Iraq war, which is still so relevant,
mhm.
because Iran, after the 1979 revolution, did something so significant that to this day haunts all of the Gulf countries, is
The
that
Sunni powers
the
specifically.
Sunni powers, especially, yeah,
Mhm.
that it made revolution an exported ideology. Like it became the idea of IRGC. And why is IRGC hated so much? Because it's a force that is dedicated to keeping the revolutionary cause alive. So I will not be surprised that if Sunni Gulf countries are supporting campaigns of US and Israel in
Of
bombing
course
of
they are. Of
IRGC
course
generals.
they are.
So
They're loving the annihilation of Hezbollah right now. You've got celebrations in Damascus when
yeah.
Nasrallah got killed. So
Exactly. So the gambling power that
hmm,
Iran has is that it can always use the idea of revolution as an export to this day.
absolutely.
And the day that the Islamic world starts feeling that maybe the Gulf powers aren't doing enough, because Iran has proved itself by arming Hezbollah and Hamas,
Hmm.
they might actually
And Hamas
start,
is Sunni.
yeah.
That makes it even better because now Iran is going beyond the Shia Sunni divide and it's
Mhm.
going for the pan Islamic Ummah, which the Sunni world always talked about. And you have a Shia power which is not even Arabic speaking, mind
Yeah.
you, going for
It's a
that.
Persian speaking Shia power.
And it makes them scared because
Yeah.
like historically the existential war in Islamic politics has always happened over that region, that
Yeah.
divide between Persia and the Semitic
Yeah.
Arabs, and
Yeah.
who gets to call the shots.
Yeah.
In fact, Shia Islam in Iran
Hmm.
wasn't spread by the Persians. It was spread by the Turkic Azeris.
Hmm.
So they were the ones who basically spread Shiism, the 12 sects, after the 15th, 16th, after the 16th century. So it's quite funny because even around that time you had a lot of confusion in the Islamic world, and suddenly these bunch of Turks from northwestern Iran decide to change the course of history. In fact, Ahmad Shah Abdali's General Nader Shah, who sacked Delhi in India, we erroneously associate him as a Persian. He wasn't a Persian. He was a Turk. He was a Turk from the Azeri lands. So even in that political obfuscation, you had Iran going for the revolution, going for something which was different than what was happening in the other Turkic world slash Arab world,
Right.
Sunni world, basically.
Yeah. I think I'm coming to the conclusion of my thoughts for this episode, and I will conclude by saying that many partial state actors, many actors backed by countries have come up, but conventional warfare is very much alive and kicking.
Mhm.
uh, Ground combat, small arms combat, urban warfare, hand to hand combat. It's an element that you will see in southern Lebanon today, you will see in Gaza today,
Mhm.
you will see in Khartoum today,
Mexico.
you will see that very much in Mexico, you will see that in Myanmar,
Mm.
you will see that unfortunately and hopefully for not too long in the Indian state of Manipur at the
In
moment,
Chhattisgarh right
in
now.
Chhattisgarh right
Chhattisgarh,
now.
the violence that is
So
happening is crazy.
maybe it's not happening at a country scale, it's
Mhm.
not happening in Europe,
Mhm.
but there are many parts of the world which are seeing things that you can very well call conventional warfare. I'm sure we have missed out so many more smaller scale conflicts, maybe in Southern America,
Mhm.
maybe in other parts of Africa, maybe in Southeast Asia,
We talked
because
about Georgia. We forgot the Abkhazian conflict, that
yes,
western tip of Georgia, which is in the Black Sea,
yeah,
which is a semi-independent country and
yeah,
is basically governed under
yeah,
Russian orders. That
right,
also fought a very low-scale war in
right, right,
1992.
right. So I think I will just like to conclude by saying that if we speak about a rules based international order, the attempt of people should be to A, start arresting the degree of ongoing conventional warfare or conflicts that we have going on right now. A, arrest the spread, and B, reverse the damage. Then point C is maybe when you start thinking about things like rules based international
Yeah,
order and
absolutely,
idealism and those kind of things. And I
absolutely.
think those are my concluding remarks. Jay, let's get yours.
My concluding remarks would be that even in this wide discussion of ours, we forgot to mention that on so many occasions, what we consider as proper states have
Hmm.
used unconventional methods to get rid of quote unquote unconventional actors. So
Hmm.
when the Naxalite movement was at its peak, the Indian state created this state-funded militia called the Salva Judum, which took the fight to the Naxals. Later on, people from Salva Judum were incorporated in the Cobra Hawk
Hmm.
Force, if I'm not wrong, of the STF. Cobra Force or Hawk Force?
Yeah, I think there are too many now. I
Yeah, there are too
think
many now,
Cobra,
but right now they are
yeah,
doing a wonderful job in
Cobra, I
and
think is a unit of the CRPF.
CRPF. Okay, the Hawk is
Hawk is in
STF.
the no Hawk is Madhya Pradesh
That's
police,
Madhya Pradesh police. STF. नहीं है, हाँ.
and STF, every state has their own.
Okay,
So you can have a Chhattisgarh
Chhattisgarh
STF, you can
STF.
have a Andhra,
Yeah,
Odisha
so
STF, whatever.
basically, Salva Judum was basically fighting the Indian states war, and then the Supreme Court declared it illegal because they said that in the Indian state you cannot have civilians take up arms. And see, an unconventional method that was used by the state. Then you had the Syrian civil war. In Syrian civil war, you had the army of Bashar al-Assad using so many unconventional methods like
Yeah.
chemical weapons and barrel bombs, the infamous barrel bombs. Now, what are barrel bombs? Barrel bombs are
Yeah.
just barrels full of the chemicals, and they're just being dropped and exploding. Ammonium nitrate, barrels full of explosive grade ammonium nitrate being dropped from the helicopters and exploding. So unconventional method used by the state. Russians using Iranian drones, unconventional.
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't know where I stand. I think, sorry to speak
Yeah.
after my conclusive remark.
Yeah.
I don't know where I stand on the suicide drone concept.
Yeah.
It makes me very uncomfortable, like morally. But a part of me thinks, okay, they're at least not using a real suicide bomber.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. I mean, I'm very conflicted about it. Almost seems like a missile strike.
It is. It
It's
is.
it's like a kamikaze drone. It's like a kamikaze like flight without an actual
Yeah.
pilot. It's a dude. The nature of warfare is changing.
So
But I
much.
feel like, okay, one last insight if I can draw.
Uh,
I think the nature of warfare is changing, but the overall brass tacks of a conventional war remains the
it
same.
remains the same. Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that in the
Of
modern
course, of course. That's why you've
framework
got the
too.
trenches. You've got the trenches.
Yeah,
You've got the trenches again. You're getting trenches after the Iran-Iraq war in a mainstream sense.
precisely.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm sure we've missed out certain things, and we will probably correct ourselves about the whole Salva Judum thing. And
Yeah, and
yes,
at the end, I think I want to say this disclaimer that
mm,
we are not endorsing wars. It would be
yeah,
an ideal world that if the whole world could come back to at least reducing the scale of ongoing violence, but we don't live in an ideal world. So this was a discussion mainly for academic, if not academic, but like policy purposes
I see. Bas baat
or
karo.
just for our hobby. But
Yeah.
more than anything, it's important to have these conversations because we
Absolutely.
don't actually know if there will be anything even resembling world peace in the near future.
Mm,
But you can definitely make attempts to tweak the balance here and there.
absolutely.
So that's what
That's
we talk about.
that's it.
And thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you
Please
so
give us
much.
legitimate feedback.
Like and subscribe.
Give us comments. Give us your thoughts. Disagree with us. Agree with us. We
Yeah.
appreciate anybody who's giving us
Yeah.
time to
But
listen
yeah,
to us.
Salva Judum did exist. Like, read about that.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Thank you so
Jay,
much.
you have anything
No, no,
concluded?
no. I concluded my thoughts. And
Thank
yeah,
you. Thank
see
you
you
for
next
joining
time.
us.
Bye. Love you.
Oh.